recently counted down the top 10 horror films from the 2010s, and now it's time to go through the top 10 horror films of the 2000s. So sit back, relax, subscribe to the channel, and enjoy the video. Up first is Ty West's The House of the Devil. Released in 2009, the film has tons of homages to films such as the Amityville Horror and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The film takes place in the 1980s, and we follow college student Samantha Hughes. To help pay for her first month's rent, she takes a very sketchy babysitting job. From there, we get one of the most authentic recreations of 1970s and early 80s slasher and haunted house films, going so far as to recreating the style of films of that era using filming techniques and similar technology to what was used then. The House of the Devil is a well-executed and well-crafted slow burn that I can't recommend enough. Up next is the 2007 vampire movie 30 Days of Night. Directed by David Slade and starring Josh Hartnett and Melissa George, the story focuses on an Alaskan town that is beset by vampires as it enters into a 30-day-long polar night. This is one of my favorite vampire movies. These vampires are scary, animalistic, and they take no prisoners. They don't sparkle, they don't twinkle, they're not sexy. These are vicious animals. The film also stays pretty close to the source material of the comic book series, which I also really enjoyed. This is a film that I watch every winter, probably around November or December. I've done a deeper dive into this film a few months back, and I've left a link up above and down in the description below if you'd like to hear my full thoughts on 30 Days of Night. Up next is Edgar Wright's horror comedy Shaun of the Dead. Starring Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, Shaun is caught unaware by the zombie apocalypse, and he and his loved ones attempt to take refuge in a local pub called the Winchester. What else is there to say about Shaun of the Dead that hasn't already been said? This is one of the funniest comedies of all time. The entire cast has great chemistry, but especially Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. Not many films hold up over time. Shaun of the Dead bucks that trend, and it still does a great job of not only being hilarious, but also very heartfelt. I have to give major props to the practical effects. These are on par with some of the best that George Romero and Tom Savini were doing in films like Day of the Dead. And the love and admiration for George Romero's Dead films is all over Shaun of the Dead. Up next is a 2007 horror anthology, Trick or Treat. Written and directed by Michael Daughtry, the four interconnected stories take place on Halloween night and all share one common element. Sam, a mysterious child trick-or-treater wearing shabby orange footy pajamas with a burlap sack over his head. Sam makes an appearance in each of the stories whenever a character breaks Halloween traditions. Trick or Treat is a film that I watch every Halloween. It's also one of the few anthology horror films that is consistently good throughout. There's not one segment that I don't enjoy, and there's not one segment that feels like a weak link. The film's cult classic status is well deserved, and Sam is one of the most recognizable horror icons. If you're looking for a film to get you into the Halloween spirit, you can't go wrong with Trick or Treat. Up next is the criminally underrated Australian horror film, The Loved Ones. Directed by Sean Byrne, the film follows Brent, who turns down his classmate Lola's invitation to the prom. Lola and her father don't take this very well, who then kidnap and torture Brent, as well as hosting their own messed up prom in their home. Lola is one of my favorite horror villains of the last 20 years. She and her father take so much glee in torturing Brent. Robin McLeavy's performance as Lola is believable and creepy. I also really felt for the character of Brent, and I also felt for the character of his girlfriend. The gore and the practical effects are incredible and stomach-turning, and there's a few points in the film, especially having to do with the hammer, some nails, and Brent's feet that make me cringe every single time. Up next is Diablo Cody's Jennifer's Body. Directed by Karen Kusama and starring Megan Fox and Amanda Seyfried, Needy and Jennifer have been friends since childhood. Jennifer is a popular cheerleader, and despite having little in common, the two of them have remained friends. One night, Jennifer takes Needy to a local dive bar to attend a concert by an indie rock band named Low Shoulder. When a fire breaks out, Jennifer ends up leaving with the band and leaving Needy behind. From there, Jennifer comes back changed, and she begins to eat the local high school boys. When this film was released in 2009, it got a lot of flack, and it didn't do well at the box office either. Since then, the film has become a cult classic and a fantastic representation of feminist horror filmmaking. I've done a deep dive on this movie, and I've left a link up above and down below where you can go and check out my in defense of Jennifer's Body. Next is one of my favorite Stephen King adaptations, and that is The Mist. Directed by Frank Darabont and starring Thomas Jane and Marcia Gay Harden, the plot revolves around members of a small town who barricade themselves from this mist. While holed up inside of the supermarket, the unnatural mist envelops the town and conceals these vicious Lovecraftian monsters. On top of that, tensions are rising among the survivors. I'm a big fan of Frank Darabont. I love Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile, and I think that the first season of The Walking Dead is incredible. What is so great about this film is the suspense and the tension, the different factions between the groups that are inside of the supermarket, as well as the really awesome creature designs. There's also some fantastic effects, some great kills. If you haven't seen The Mist in a while or haven't seen it at all, definitely give this one a watch. Coming in at number 3 is 28 Days Later, directed by Danny Boyle. The film focuses on the breakdown of society following the accidental release of a highly contagious virus and focuses upon the struggle of 4 survivors who are trying to cope with the destruction of the life they once knew while evading those infected by the virus. 28 Days Later truly terrified me the first time I saw it, and it's one of those films that gets better and better on every rewatch. This is easily my favorite film by Danny Boyle, and I love both Trainspotting as well as Shallow Grave. From the performances, screenplay, atmosphere, and the soundtrack, this film has it all. 28 Days Later also reinvigorated the zombie genre, and it increased the popularity of fast-moving zombies. Without this film, we wouldn't have had the Dawn of the Dead remake or maybe even Shaun of the Dead. And the eye-gouging scene still freaks me out. At number 2 is American Psycho. Based on Bret Easton Ellis's 1991 novel of the same name, this film is co-written and directed by Mary Harron. The film takes place in 1988 and revolves around Patrick Bateman, who's a wealthy New York investment banker. We see him dining out at trendy restaurants while keeping up appearances with his fiancée Evelyn and his circle of wealthy and shallow associates, most of whom he dislikes. The other side we see of Patrick Bateman is his lust for blood, violence, and death. The biting satire of American Psycho is what sets this film apart from others. Every performance in this film is incredible, but especially Christian Bale as Patrick Bateman. If you'd like to hear my in-depth review on American Psycho, check out the link up above or down in the description below. And finally, at number 1 is The Descent. Directed by Neil Marshall, The Descent is an exercise in suspense, terror, and back-to-basics horror. From the moment the film starts, you know that you're in for a wild ride. And even before the creatures show up in the film, there's already this suspense. We're following along as they're going through these caves, and the claustrophobia around them is terrifying. We also get to know these characters really well, and I feel for the character of Sarah, and to a certain extent, I feel for Juno. It's also great to see an all-female cast with all of these women being able to hold their own. So once the creatures do show up, that fight for survival feels so visceral and so real. There is not one thing that I don't love about this film. To me, this is one of the most perfect horror films that I've ever seen. It's easily in my top 10 horror films of all time, which is why it makes the #1 spot on this list. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support this channel even more, check out my Patreon page. There's a link down in the description below. Thank you so much for coming by, and I'll see you guys in the next video.